Specially made for Rhondda Cynon Taf. We are GTFM.
There's Delamitri playing at GTFM and Roll to Me. So the moment has come then. My very special guest on the show today is First Minister for Wales, Mark Drakeford. First of all, good afternoon, First Minister.
Afternoon, Gareth.
How are you today? You okay?
Yeah, not too bad. Thank you. Good to be with you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us on GTFM. So let's start at the beginning then. You were born in Carmarthen, and I would imagine a very nice place to spend your childhood.
Yes, it was, absolutely. It's a long time ago, and the world was very different. And in some ways, you know, I think probably an easier place for children than it is today. You know, at a very young age, we were just able to go by ourselves down to the park to play, or my grandparents, one set of my grandparents were parents, and you just go, you know, you just, at the age of 6 or 7, you get up in the morning, you go down the fields. There was a railway line down one edge of the farm. There was a river that ran at the other end of it, and nobody ever said, you know, are you sure it's safe to let him go? We were very lucky.
A different time, wasn't it? Were your parents politically minded? Did they have strong opinions about the way the country was being run back then?
I wouldn't have said so, really, when I was first growing up. My mother's family were the farming family, were absolutely standard textbook, well-speaking, chapel-going, liberal voting. You know, that sort of great Welsh rural tradition. My father was a teacher, and I would have said when I was growing up, he didn't have a huge interest in politics, although he took me to things. When I look back, you know, when I was growing up, if somebody came to speak in Carmarthen, so I remember, I'm this old, I remember Sir Alec Douglas Hume, after he'd stopped being Prime Minister, he came and did a big public meeting. And I would have been less than 10 years old, but my father took me to hear him. Not because he was interested in party politics, but he thought it would be, you know, a good experience for me. He became radicalized later in life by Mrs. Thatcher. So whereas, you know, it's often said as you get older, you get more small c conservative. My father did the opposite. He disliked Mrs. Thatcher with a passion, and for everything that she did here in Wales. And the older he got, the more radical he became.
Do you remember a feeling of shock in the town in Carmarthen when Gwynfor Evans won the Carmarthen parliamentary seat in 1966? That was a real shock, wasn't it?
I do remember it. I remember coming downstairs in the morning. I was 11 years old and hearing the result on the radio. And it was a shock because, you know, he was the first ever Plaid Cymru MP, and Megan Lloyd-George, who'd been a very popular Labour MP for the Carmarthen seat, had been elected with a very big majority only a few months earlier in the general election. There was no doubt she was very ill by then, and in modern circumstances she probably wouldn't have stood at all. But it's a by-election, and things are different in by-elections. And yes, I remember the sense of surprise and excitement as well. I would say not just surprise, you know, there's a lot of excitement about it as well.
Now, you did well academically at the Queen Elizabeth Grammar School, is that right, First Minister?
Yeah, back then there was a boys' school and a girls' school, and you know, the 11 plus was still part of people's lives. I'm so pleased it's not any longer. And yes, I was lucky. I was in conventional terms, I was bright and did okay.
What about sport then? Were you much of a sports fan? Did you play rugby and football, that sort of thing?
In Carmarthen Boys Grammar School, you only played rugby. Football was not allowed. And I played because everybody played, but not because I was any good or anything. I was interested from the very beginning in cricket. My grandfather and my father were big cricket fans. They took me to see the last time Glamorgan ever played a 3-day game in Llanelli. You know, probably about 1964 or something like that. And we used to go very regularly from Carmarthen to St Helens at a weekend. Those days, the Sunday League would be played. And myself, my dad, and some friends of ours, we'd go en masse. And you know, that was our weekend, really, in the summer.
What about music? Were you a fan of the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or Elvis?
My brother and I both had Beatle wigs. So I'll tell you one of the funnier stories of recent times. So this is a teacher telling me the story of being with his primary school class and saying to them, do you know who the First Minister is? And this boy put his hand up and he said, yes. And he said, well, do you know his name? He said, yes, it's Mark Drakeford. Do you know anything about him? He said, he's the one who looks like Paul McCartney. Now then, Gareth. I should have found my old Beatle wig that my brother and I both had when we were growing up.
That's funny. That's funny. You studied Latin at the University of Kent, if I'm right, and you graduated at the University of Exeter. Did you join any political groups back then?
Yeah, I was already a member of the Labour Party before I went to university. And to join the Labour Party when you were 17 or 18, it was a left-wing thing to do. But when you arrived in the University of Kent and said you were a member of the Labour Party, this was to cast you into the outer darkness of the far right of student politics, because, I used to sit in the Students' Union occasionally and hear long speeches from members of the International Marxist Group on were the working class of Canterbury about to rise. And I used to say to them, well, we could pop down and ask them, because there's no more than half a dozen of them living there. So the sort of politics that I was interested in, which was practical politics and the sort of politics that makes a difference, was very, very different to student politics, which I had very little interest in at all.
And were you an outspoken member of the Students' Union? They're always quite common, aren't they?
Well, as I said, I used to go there occasionally, but I used to find the debate so removed from the things that I thought mattered to people in their daily lives that I didn't feel it was worth a great deal of my time. I did spend quite a bit of my first year there sat in the registry, as people did in those days. You asked me about music. When I was in school in Carmarthen, music was the biggest thing that I did. Music was a very big part of the life of the school, and you were very lucky, for nothing. You were taught to play, as I was taught to play the clarinet and to be in the orchestra and the county orchestra and things. And I joined a small trio. There were two or three of us, two Americans. One played the clarinet, one played the bassoon, and there was me. And we played Mozart trios in the dark in the registry during a sit-in, while people looked through their files to see what was being said of them by the authorities.
Do you still play today?
Well, I very, very occasionally. It's one of the sadder things. When I was growing up, I did a load of music, and in university I played a huge amount of music as well, and sang and things as well. When I came to Cardiff and was working and ended up being a counsellor and stuff like that, music is the big thing that suffered from that, really, because it was just never possible to find the time reliably to go on, every Tuesday night to a choir rehearsal or to an orchestra rehearsal. And so every now and then I take it out of the case just to remember it.
Just to top up. Now, you've trained to become a teacher and social worker. Now, you mentioned Cardiff. You moved to Cardiff in the late 1970s and began working as a probation officer, I believe, and a youth justice worker. And you were also project leader at Bernardo's. A real mix of interesting work, I have to say.
I was very lucky. I came to Cardiff. I didn't know Cardiff at all, really. I knew Swansea much better, coming from the west. And you were just allocated to a team in the probation office, and I was allocated to the team that worked on the west of the city. So mostly in the sort of Ely Estate area, and in a way that wasn't very usual. I really liked working with young people. So adolescents were not the favourite group of people to work with in the probation office. But I really liked working with adolescents. I really liked their sort of cussedness, really, the way that they approach life. And I started work with young people in Ely and loved it from the beginning, and still do it really in a different way 40 years later.
So throughout the 1990s, you lectured at both Swansea and Cardiff universities before being promoted, if you like, to a senior lecturer in 1999. And then you were appointed as a professor in 2003. Very impressive CV, First Minister, I've got to say.
Well, I loved teaching, Gareth. That was, I think to do the job I do now and to be a teacher as well, you've got to have a little bit of a show off in you somewhere, because you're performing, aren't you? You're standing up there, you're trying to...
Just like broadcasters, really, isn't it?
Yeah, no, indeed. They've got to have a little bit of that in you somewhere, haven't you? Because you're trying to keep people's attention. If you're giving a lecture, you've got 50 minutes to fill, and that's a long time. And you've got to somehow try and keep it interesting and keep people involved. And I really, really liked being with students. And I enjoyed writing a bit as well when I felt I had something to say. And if you work in the university, you get those chances as well. I generally did a day a week as a youth justice worker at the same time. So if I was trying to teach people how to do the job, I wasn't relying on, long faded memories. I could say, well, on Friday when I was out seeing somebody or writing a report or being in court, this is how it worked out. And I used to think that gave you a different level of credibility, really, with the people you were teaching.
Now, you first became a councillor in Cardiff in the mid-1980s. Yeah. Looking back now, those years in local government, because that would have been South Glamorgan County Council, I believe.
Yes, yeah. Indeed.
Essential experience ready for Welsh government years later, a good grounding.
Oh, I think so. I think being a councillor is a fantastic job. In that era, in South Glamorgan, you were what they call single member wards. There was just you and a relatively small area that you represented, about 3,000 people. And I lived in the ward, as I still do, that I represented. And after 10 years, I really did feel like I knew the place inside out. And anything that was going on, you understood and you knew about it, and you could help people wherever you could. And the county council was responsible for big services like education and social services, as well as things like libraries and culture and so on. And it was a fantastic grounding, really, and I really appreciated it a lot.
Yeah. Now, you were part of the successful Yes for Wales campaign in the 1997 Welsh devolution referendum. Did you work closely with Ron Davies, who, of course, was the Secretary of State for Wales under the Blair government?
I didn't know Ron really at all. I worked very closely with Rhodri Morgan, who was by then the Member of Parliament for Cardiff West, where I lived, and who was Ron's number 2 in the years that Labour was in opposition while we were planning for devolution and doing all the sort of spade work to make sure that if there was a Labour government, we could get on with it. So I worked very closely with him. I used to chair the South Glamorgan Yes for Wales campaign, and it's a remarkable story, really. The whole idea was so heavily defeated in 1979, and less than 20 years later, very narrowly, as you remember, and with all sorts of difficult excitement on the night, we just got over that line, and it was a great moment, I think, in modern Welsh history.
In 2011, following Rhodri Morgan's retirement, you replaced him as Assembly member for Cardiff West. Big boots to fill.
Yeah, and not an easy decision, really, for me. I'd been part of Rhodri's office for the first 10 years. From as soon as he became First Minister, I gave up working in the university. I worked there 1 day a week on a Friday and 4 days a week working in Rhodri's office. And that was a huge privilege and an enormous insight into the way that government works, and watching somebody doing it who was, just sort of, a master at it as well. And then Rhodri decided to retire, and, there was a question, should I have a go? Should I try and see whether I could become the Assembly member as it was then? And, I was ambivalent about it. I had a job I enjoyed in the university. I really, really enjoyed being part of Rhodri's team. Did I want to do it? In the end, Gareth, what I thought to myself was I didn't want to look back in a couple of years later and think to myself, what if? what if you'd had a go? What if you tried? But I thought, give it a go and see what happens. And then at least you won't look back and regret that you didn't try.
Of course, your big moment came then in 2018 after Carwyn Jones stepped down as First Minister and the position of Welsh Labour Party leader became vacant. Did you need much persuasion to stand?
Oh, look, I think, if you don't need persuasion, you probably shouldn't do the job. I think people who just want it, are probably not the right people for it, because it's an all-consuming job and it affects not just you, but your family and people as well. I don't think I had expected that Carwyn I expect Carwyn to go on a bit longer, and by the time he had retired, I wouldn't have expected myself to have been a candidate. But in all the circumstances, we were facing the aftermath of Brexit, particularly at the time, and I'd been the minister responsible for that. And I felt that, I can never find the right words, but it sounds pompous if you say it the wrong way. But I felt a bit that I had a responsibility to at least offer people in the Labour Party that I would do that job if they wanted me to do it.
Now, a year into your term as First Minister, of course, the coronavirus pandemic struck. What was the general feeling in the Cabinet in February and March 2020? Did ministers panic just a little bit?
Oh, I think the very first time we heard it, there was a sense quite of shock. So we first heard about it in in January, the end of January. In an ordinary Cabinet meeting, the Chief Medical Officer came and said, I think I need to alert you to the fact that there is this emerging disease that we are seeing in Europe. And it appears to be having, a very serious effect on people who fall ill from it. And it's very contagious. And we decided there and then that we would reassemble later that day to have a meeting with the Chief Medical Officer that would just give us all the information that he had, because it just sounded like something we'd knew nothing about and needed to know a lot about very quickly. So from the very beginning, I think there was a real sense of the significance of what was coming our way.
Now, before you go, First Minister, there is a review, of course, on Friday. I suspect Cabinet Ministers' meetings are actually penciled in for the next few days. Based on what you know today, can our listeners feel optimistic there'll be good news on Friday?
Yeah, I think people should feel that. We've dealt with that enormous wave that was Omicron, which crashed over Wales at the end of December, but did behave in the way that the modelers, Swansea University do the work for us on the model. They always said we would get a very steep rise and a very steep fall. And once the numbers started to fall, they have indeed continued to fall, and they've fallen again this week. And the number of people in hospital, new people in hospital, has been falling as well. So, that does give us a bit of optimism that as we go into the better part of the year, and, people know coronavirus is a seasonal illness. It doesn't like the summer. It thrives in the dark and the cold and the wet of winter. As we move into the better part of the year, I think people can have a sense of optimism that unless something unexpected happens, and we can't rule that out, that we are on a pretty positive path now in Wales.
Good. Now, you've indicated that you won't stand again as First Minister in the next Senydd elections. Any plans for retiring, and what might you do? Write an autobiography, maybe after dinner, Speaker?
Yeah, look, I'll be 70 before the end of the Senate term, which, I find very hard to believe, but I'm sure others find it easier to believe it. So, there are grandchildren, and I definitely want to be able to spend more time enjoying all of that. I've got my allotment, which somebody said to me, how would you sum up your allotment the other day? And I said, well, in a single word, neglected, because I don't get there as often as I'd like to. So I'm looking forward to having time to do that sort of thing. I would like to probably go back and do some work in the university. Again, just, being with young people and being able to share some of the experiences of the last 20 years for them as they become the future of us here in Wales.
Now, there's a thought for you. After dinner, Speaker, sharing the stage with Boris Johnson.
Oh, I don't see that being a lot of laughs myself. I've done after dinner speaking. I've not enjoyed it hugely because everybody else spends the evening enjoying themselves and eating and drinking and having a good time. And if you're the person who's got to come on at the end, there's always a bit of you that sits there thinking, oh dear, it's getting closer. I have to be on my feet before long. And so, no, I probably don't intend to do a huge amount of that, and certainly not with Mr. Johnson.
First Minister Mark Drakeford, thank you very much for sharing your time with us on GTFM today. It's been much appreciated. Diolch.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.